Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode 2023.7. I'm Rohan, and with me, as usual, we've got Phil. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Rohan, how's it going?
Good. This episode's been sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabu Casa. Easily access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that supports the Home Assistant and the ESP Home projects. Configuration is done by the user interface, so there's no fiddling with router settings, SSL certs, or any kind of YAML. All right, let's jump into it, Phil.
2023.7 is going to be huge.
Yeah. Well,
I think we're going to have a big episode today. There is a lot to talk about.
Yeah. There's first and foremost, there's the Year of the Voice kind of headline that's happening now. So that's chapter 3. So if you've been following this year, they did chapter 1 and chapter 2, where they talked about a lot of the voice features coming into Home Assistant, being focused on privacy and so on. Rather than having to use things like your Amazon Echo and so on, you can, hopefully eventually start to leverage Home Assistant for that bit. We actually got the chance to catch up with Mike Hansen, who is the person behind a lot of the voice features that's coming into Home Assistant, and kind of what he's been up to with the Year of the Voice. So check that out. We're going to premiere that on July 9th. And then the chapter 3 part from Nabu Casa also lands in July. So should be good timing. Check out where Mike's headspace is at, and then have a listen to that episode to the chapter 3 announcements there.
Mm. Yeah, because we when we actually recorded chapter 3 wasn't an idea yet. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what is in chapter 3 and what is in chapter 3. It's pretty fun. But yeah, it was a great chat with Mike.
Yeah. And they're going to talk about what's coming. And
yeah. All right. 2023.7, Rohan. I think I say this every release. This is my favorite release of the year so far. But this one, I think, has one of the biggest, I think Paul has described it on our creators call. It's one of the biggest changes in Home Assistant in 10 years. And I would agree with that. And I think it's the headline of this. So this is a big change in things moving forward. And that is that services can now respond, or if you're a programmer, you return with data. And this is something that's been missing for me for ages. So as an example, when you make a call to turn on a light switch or call a script, there was no way for that call to the service to return data. So you would need to store things in like input helpers. If you're calling a script, you'd then have to get that to save in, like an input text or an input select somewhere. Now services can return data, which can then be used in your automations. So for example, if you want a script which returns the events in your calendar for today, you can do that. And the script will then bubble that information back to whoever called it, so the automation that called it. And I think one of the use cases that the Home Assistant is going to feature is now with ChatGPT. There's a couple of new services that are being brought in. So one is a new calendar list events service. So you can call calendar.listEvents and it will return a JSON structure, so an array of events that are on your calendar. You can then have your automation save that into a variable inside your automation, push that over to a new conversation endpoint for ChatGPT, and you can tell ChatGPT, here is the weather today, here is the events in my calendar, summarize that into something that sounds like a Jarvis announcement, for example. ChatGPT then responds back with the summary text of your events and the weather and all that. You can then use that data, return the data or the response from ChatGPT and push that to a notify service. So that could be to your phone as a push notification, a Telegram message, or text-to-speech around the house. So
that's pretty cool. So you can do the whole, like, I know like the Amazon Echo and stuff natively has this too, being like, hey, what's on the list today? Or like a lot of people have it integrated with their good morning scripts, right? Saying, hey, good morning. And then it'll go in and say whatever. The nice thing here is you can integrate that with the Home Assistant voice to text and like the Home Assistant, like You're the Voice project,
Yeah.
essentially, right? And have that in a more private way, right? So now what's happening, and it could be a notification, it could be a whatever, an email alert, a webhook that it fires off to some other service,
Absolutely.
or anything like that. So it doesn't have to be voice, right? But voice is probably one of the more common use cases where you're like, hey, what's my day looking like? And it actually queries Home Assistant, which might have integrations in with your calendar and so on and so forth. So there's actually a really neat use case there, right? To say, hey, this is where I can go with having that integration in, and combining that, again, responding with data and so on and so forth is, I think a pretty neat approach of doing it, right?
So I have a different use case. So one thing that I have a smart lock in my home, and it allows me to push custom user access codes. So, for example, if the cleaner is coming over or in-laws coming over, I can have a different code that is unique to them, and they can punch it in. But then I can disable it, so it's after sunset or out of working hours. Those people can't access the front door. Now, the problem I have with that is that I need to tell. So for me to push over that PIN code, let's say it's 1234. Home Assistant needs to make a service call over Z-Wave to the door lock and say, user slot 1 has code 1234. Yeah. Now, the problem I have there is I need Home Assistant to be able to keep those access codes in a variable somewhere. And I've been using input numbers for that. Now, from a security point of view, anyone that can access my developer tools can then see the access code in the developer tools as it's just an entity, right? So it's on my default Lovebase dashboard. There's an entity, cleaner access code 1234. Now I can create a script that says, return me what the cleaner's access code is, and that will return from the service call. Still not as secure, yes, if you know what you're doing, you could access the data, but it does mean I don't need an entity dedicated to just the access code for this person. And now I can leverage, I'm guessing I can leverage secrets to do this as well. So in my script, I can then leverage a secret, which I could previously do with the variables and all that. It got messy. But I think this is, just a very cool way to be able to, go in and return things to automations. Another cool thing is just being able to create like consistency around the places. So if you want a script that is like a global way for the house to know, all right, the lights need to be dimmed at this level because it's this time of the evening. Previously, I would have to copy over like templates to the same automations, put them in variables and all that. It gets messy. Now I can just have a script. What is the percentage for the lights meant to be? And it calculates it on the fly. So there are a couple of ideas I've been toying with. I don't know, Ryan, if there's anything in your home that you would find a use case for being able to return data instead of having to cache it somewhere.
I mean, I think more just from a state perspective, I'd love to see, if a service happens, I'd love to see, like, again, for devices that support it, right, a proper in-band, if you want to call it like that, like a return saying like, hey, this is like, yep, we verified the service and it's good, right? Like whatever that is. And I know some stuff does it today, right? Like, but it can be a more generic, doesn't matter where, like kind of wider spread kind of piece there. But I think that is, I don't have as big of a use case. I do want to try playing with, again, I'm at the point where I think I want to start playing with some of the You're the Voice stuff. I've played with it a little bit, but I haven't actually like jumped in with both feet. But I think I do want to start doing those kind of things. Maybe replacing things like my Amazon Echo and doing those kind of things. I don't know if I'm that far in yet, but or what that's going to entail. But that's why I'm excited for the chapter 3 to see what You're the Voice chapter 3 has to hold in terms of that, right? So I think I'd love to see more of that kind of stuff, and more of like the kind of the use case that we talked about, right? That you initially talked about, saying, hey, like we can ask it something, it can go in, return something from that service, and then run that through another service, potentially like ChatGPT or whatever.
Yep.
Right. And then from there, do whatever else. Right. So it's more of I can actually start replacing these. So right now, the problem is with the Home Assistant voice, I have no way of being like, hey, what's the weather today in Paris, France? Right. Whereas with Amazon Echo or Google Homes or stuff like that, I can do that because it is internet connected. It is able to talk to whatever, right, and query whatever services. So with this, potentially, I can start doing that now because I can start doing things like you said, like returning values in directly and do it simply. Not to say that I can't do it today. It's just that'll be like 4 or 5 steps instead of one, right?
I guess, now the issue you've got though is like, yes, you could call as long as you know that you want to get the weather from Paris, France, that's fine. I don't think you could create like that, change that to Sydney, Australia tomorrow, right? I think you're still going to need like a lot of updates to the voice stuff still. The return stuff that is here today would allow you to at least put a script that says, all right, call, weather.com for Paris, France, and return that back to your automation or whatever you've got, and then push it to wherever you need to.
Exactly. So the rest of those pieces now can come in with like you send something out to ChatGPT, it returns you like, hey, what are the coordinates of Paris, France, as an example, right? It comes back, and then that's something true. You can push into like whatever weather service or whatever that you're querying, right? Whatever API. So I guess maybe I misspoke a little bit when I said, I can do it in one call or two. So maybe it's not one or two, maybe it's like a couple rather than, 7, 8 different steps, right? Ping ponging back and forth. You go now ask you, now go ask this, now go figure that out. So I think that's where it becomes a lot easier. And even things like, again, there's other services too, right? Not just ChatGPT. It could be even Bard as an example, right? Like where it is internet connected and can pull more live data and stuff like that, right? I know it didn't really get the best rap after some of their demos and stuff, but I mean, other than that, like, or whatever other service, right? It doesn't have to be one of those two too. So I think it just makes it a little bit easier when you're able to go pull in some of those pieces there.
That's true. Because I guess if you're using the Home Assistant Assist, I wonder. I haven't played with it yet properly, but I wonder, if you type in, what is the weather in Sydney, Australia, and it shoots off, a call to ChatGPT. I wonder if the response back, you can then say, okay, Sydney, Australia has these coordinates. You can, with these return values, maybe not in this release, maybe in the future, this is where we're sort of heading. You can say, okay, the response value had this location. All right, I'm going to take that location, pump it over through this script, which we'll call a weather API, return that data back, and then return this to your notification system. Like that's where
this is an example. I'm sure there's weather APIs out there where I can just say Sydney, Australia, and it'll go out and give me the weather for Sydney, right? Like it's just as an example of like some of the things you may be able to do. But even from a Home Assistant Assist perspective, right? Like, you have, let's say your little M5 stack, you push the button and you say, okay, get me the weather for again, my previous example, Paris, France, right? It can go in and then bring the result back in that same service, right? And then based on that, I can do something else. So it just makes it a little more efficient. Can I do this today? Probably, right? You can probably do it easy today, but it just makes it a little easier, right? And a little more efficient, right? So the way I look at it is if that's one less sensor, if that's one less anything like that, that's that much more efficient on my system.
So to support all this, return data, it's not available in all services. I think they've only enabled it, for example, like the calendar, conversation, integration enables it, and any scripts that you have custom built, they will be supporting return values. Home Assistant internally, there are 3 types of responses that all services are expected to adhere to. That is that they will always have a response, so they will always return something. They sometimes have a response. So, for example, calling a weather service if the weather service is offline, maybe it won't return any data, and it never has a response. Currently, every integration in Home Assistant, bar the calendar, conversation, and any scripts, will be set to never has a response. And then as they slowly, in future releases, they'll enable responses for the light domain, the switch domain. You'll be able to know, okay, yes, has a response, and do this. So yeah, I can even see things like, for example, one of the frustrating things I find at the moment is if I turn a light on for whatever reason, and the Home Assistant UI will actually turn if it fails because maybe the Z-Wave network's down or the Zigbee sticks not working. Home Assistant, the UI will vibrate my phone. Think, nope, there's an error, couldn't send that data. But there's no way for me to know that light switch, that light hasn't come on from an automation perspective. So if I walk into a room, I'm not looking at the Home Assistant UI, I don't know that service call failed. In the future, Home Assistant return value should be able to say, okay, you just called the light turn on service, I'm returning false, that didn't work, there was an error. I can then have an automation to say, okay, send an alert to Phil's phone to say, we just tried to turn the light on in the hallway, it didn't work. Now you need to, something's wrong. So that would be a fantastic use case. Or even I can then automate my troubleshooting and go, okay, the light didn't turn on in the hallway. Is the Z-Wave network down? Yes, no, okay. If it is, maybe reboot the Docker container that's running Z-Wave.js. Whole bunch of stuff this opens up for. But anyway, enough about that. Go for the next one, Rohan.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on this, but there's also a new service to speak to the conversation agent, right? So basically the idea is it responds with what Home Assistant did. So for example, if you use ChatGPT, you can call ChatGPT in an automation and then push that data to your TTS agent, right? So we'll leave the show note. We'll leave it in the show notes, but there's basically Alan Porter has created even a blueprint that kind of does that summary for you in ChatGPT. It is pretty neat.
Yeah. So essentially, I like so in your automation, you can actually say, all right, pretend I said, turn on the light. And then that will return back and say, okay, according to the assistant, here's what I did. So that's pretty cool. Also, a great way to debug, how people would speak to your home if you want to maybe have some unit tests in your own home. Does Home Assistant turn on the bathroom light when someone says turn on the bathroom light? Or if they say it in a different way. So that's very good as well. There's a new entity dialog for locks. So in previous releases, we've talked about the new dialogues for alarm panels, lights, the locks now have that. So just bringing that in line with everything else. So good to see that being updated.
Yeah, that's I'm really liking the new entity dialogues, right? So for what it's worth, I think they look really nice.
I think there's going to be a very sexy one in the next release for climate devices. If it didn't make it into this release, but from what I saw, I'm looking forward to the August release.
Yeah, that should be nice. Open Assistant action. So you can now place a button on your dashboard, which will open the Assist Assistant. All right, Home Assistant Assistant.
Such a mouthful.
So, for example, if you have a wall-mounted tablet, rather than trying to go find the little button on the side somewhere, you can just stick a button, press that, and it'll basically say, "Hey, you know what? Go run the script that basically opens that assistant." But on that, though, there's also a little side note, which is kind of cool. There's now over 1 million Android devices running the Home Assistant app. So, that's a really cool. Random size statistic, but that is actually a pretty large amount of installs, right? So that's pretty awesome. Thanks to
so here's something that's not in the notes, but I think it was rolling out in beta for the Android app. So I'm not sure if it's going to be released as of when 2023.7 goes out, but the Android app is currently working with enabling like Android assistant features. So in Android phones, you have the ability to choose which assistant you want to run. So if you've got the Amazon little lady app on your phone, so the Amazon Echo app on your phone, you can choose to have her as your phone's assistant. If you've got a Samsung phone, it might default to Bixby. And of course, everyone knows Google Assistant is also on Android phones. When you just say, "Hey there, Google," open up, Home Assistant. The Assistant is now available as an option on these Android devices, which means you can then use your phone's native way of calling the assistant to then directly talk to the Home Assistant. So very cool. So if you've got a wall-mounted tablet, which is an Android, and it has the ability to support these custom assistants, instead of having to, find a little soft button, you could, if there is a hardware button to call a voice assistant on your tablet on the wall, you could just walk up to the tablet, push that button, and you'll be directly talking to Home Assistant. So that's very good.
Which is cool. Is there a way to, in Android again, because I'm not an Android user, but is there a way to tie, like, instead of saying the keyword like whatever Google, is there a way to say like okay assist or something like that today, and it can trigger that? Like I know it's not natively in the Android app that Home Assistant provides, companion app, but is there a way to like have a shortcut that it could do that, or no?
I'm not sure. I think it depends. Like, so the Google definitely has the ability to do this. I think when your phone's unlocked or something, you can have that option to say, when I say the key, the magic phrase, it will wake up the phone and do that. Similar to what I think Siri has for the iPhone. But for third-party apps like the Amazon Echo, I know you can set her as the default assistant, but I think you still need to physically hold, like I've got a Samsung S22 or S23, whatever it is. You've got to hold down the home button to let her start listening. I assume that this is going to be the same for the Home Assistant app. So there's not going to be any wake word that you can just walk up to a tablet and yell. You have to take some physical action to enable to turn on the microphone and allow it to the app.
Understood. Okay. All right. I mean, it's something, right? Like it's...
well, if there's a million Android devices out there, it's a very quick way to get access to the Home Assistant, voice assistant on all those devices already with existing hardware. So especially if you've got like an old Android tablet just laying around somewhere, this could be a good use case for it.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right, a new type of entity landing in this release are called image entities. So they're similar to the camera entity, except they only supply an image. So a great use case for this would be a QR code that provides Wi-Fi credentials for your guest network, a weather map. I've previously done something like this ages ago for my very first, when dashboards were called Lovelace dashboards, with a windy thing. I did something similar. I think I must have used like an iframe. Now I can potentially just use this new image entity. And of course, you can use an image of the last motion detected by a camera. So support for the new entity has been added to the AVM Fritzbox tools for guest network access, and the MQTT integration and the template integration if you want to build your own. I know the Ring motion cameras, like the Ring doorbells, they supply the last image as an attribute on the sensor, so I might make a template image integration just to push that image through as an image entity to my dashboard. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, it's neat too. Like you said, like the QR code for Wi-Fi kind of thing is always a fun use case. That's actually one I've been looking at for a bit.
Yeah.
In terms of like, where do I do it? Where should I do it? Like, where should I put it? Building it's not hard. You can just get even if you don't want to use this, get a ESP32 with like a little screen and just pop up, right? Like that kind of thing. But if you do have a wall-mounted tablet like near your front door or something, that could also be like something where you just display that entity until like the defaults could be you display that entity. So you have a guest that walks in, you can just hey, here you go. And then when you want to use it, just tap your like alarm panel or whatever, and then do whatever you have to do, right? So that's or integrate that as part of that same piece, right? Like, on the side there, you just have a little image entity with your QR code that connects to people to Wi-Fi, to your guest Wi-Fi, whatever that is.
I have a Netgear canvas mural, and I'm just thinking I might even be able to use. I think there's a proxy entity, a proxy attribute to show what image is currently being displayed on my canvas. So I could even create an image entity of what the current image being displayed on my canvas mural is. So in my Lovelace dashboard, I could have like, this is what's currently being displayed.
Of your picture.
Yeah. Here's a picture of your picture that's currently on your frame. There you go.
That's right. But it is a cool, like, if you do want to monitor, like, let's say you set it up fresh and you want to, you're out, whatever, and you're just like, hey, you know what, let me just see what if it's actually doing its thing, right? And you can see that. But I mean, beyond like the first hour, I don't know what the use case there is.
Yeah.
But all right. Copy and paste support for dashboards. So you can now cut, copy, and paste cards between dashboard views or even inside other nested cards. That is phenomenal.
That's a game changer.
It makes it, so when you have to reorganize your dashboard, so for example, if you have like a horizontal stack inside a vertical stack, inside of this, inside of that, and it's like, okay, well, I need to move this. You're basically recreating the entire thing right now, right?
Or copy and pasting YAML and getting messed up.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I've been doing. So I moved from, I used to have static YAML, whatever, and I decided a couple of months ago, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm just going to bring it all natively into Lovelace with the UI editor. So when I did that, I realized I'm like, okay, as I'm going through this, there's a couple of things here which I put it under the wrong like nesting or whatever, and it was just a pain. This will make it so much easier. Now, unfortunately, this is what happens to me every time. Once I've figured something out, an easier version comes out the week after, or after, or whatever. So I mean, I'm still glad that it's here, because if I do ever want to redo it, it's there. But you still need to understand kind of how the other cards work in the columns and stuff like that. It's just a matter of now, if you mess up, like I did several times, it's easier to just be like, you know what, I'm just going to cut this and paste it over there. Right. Just nice and smooth.
So the positional number, which is really handy, is actually displayed now when you are in edit mode on your dashboard. So I've had instances where I've created a new card, and then I've been like, all right, it's down the bottom. How do I move it up? And I'd be hitting the up arrow and it wouldn't move up. So there must be like an ordering number in the background that's not being displayed. That should now be displayed against your cards. And now what you can do, let's say you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and you want to move, card 4 to position 1. So it's at the top. Previously, you would have to, constantly click the up arrow until it's at the top. Now you can just take out number 4, like you can click on the number 4 because it's a text box, type in number 1, change it to number 1, and it will move, like teleport itself to the first position at the top of the screen.
Right.
So now you don't have to constantly click cards around the screen and do all that.
Yeah, which is great.
I think that's also getting very close to drag and drop.
That's the ideal piece for me. I mean, if I'm not smart enough, but whoever is building these, if you wanna do that, that would be phenomenal. But I'll take this. I mean, I went through quite a bit of pain when I had to do it before, so I will happily take this, at least as a start.
All right. If you're creating scripts in the interface, so through the UI, there's now a new script dialog similar to when you create an automation through the UI. Click Add Script. It will now give you a prompt, so you can install from a blueprint or create a blank one. So just tweaking the flow there a little bit. So when you create scripts, it's similar to creating an automation.
Here's a question for you. Where do you delineate where you want to use a script versus an automation?
For me, that's an easy one. Scripts hold reusable code for me. So Let's say, so I used an example before about lights and being on the right setting. I would potentially have a script that would have turn on this light, and inside the script, I would have my logic to work out what brightness that needs to be. So that way I don't have to put the logic of what the brightness needs to be in 100 automations. I can just put it in one script and have the 100 automations call that one script to work out, to make sure it's always on the right setting. Similar thing on the lights sort of thing. I have when I want some accent lights, so some hue color changing bulbs to randomly change color, I have script for that. So I would have like a turn on light to a random color that would then go through a script. The reason I do that is because inside that script, I then also have logic that should it be a random color, or depending on what state some things around the house are in. So for example, if my dishwasher is done, don't use a random color, turn the light to pink. Or if the washing machine's done, turn the light to green, just so I have a central place where I can manage that logic. Does that make sense?
Okay, so that's basically so the reason I asked is because I was actually having this conversation with somebody like 2 weeks ago, maybe. And they were like, well, because they're new to Home Assistant, right? And I kind of explained the same thing, right? Script is that piece of reusable logic, if you want to call it, not necessarily code, reusable logic that you can call into other automations and so on. I just didn't know if you had a better delineation of where you use one versus the other, but it sounds like it's fairly similar, right? In terms of what I said. And so I thought it was, for me, again, I kind of described it. I've literally only got a single script, right? But I do call it in a couple of automations, right? So like, for example, it's my good evening script, right? So it's like turn on these lights at this percent, those lights at that percent, whatever. And then from an automation perspective, I call that anytime it is good evening time, right? It'll automatically fire that off. Or like if I leave, it'll turn off some lights and I come back in, it'll fire off all that good evening again, right? But and the other thing too is scripts also will have it will keep your previously changed value there as well, right? So, sorry, no, that's a scene. So scripts will not do that. Yeah. Script will still fire off and force it to do that. But and then there's scenes as well, right? So it's which will kind of keep those values and stuff. So, but I do leverage a couple of things there, but it's for that reusability that I use it for. So I didn't know if other people use it for other stuff other than that. So. I think for me it's like reusability. Also, once again, going like based from programming terms, I use it like as a function as well. So scripts can take variables. So when I'm moving around the house, I have my Sonos speakers. You know, when I move into a room, the Sonos speaker then compare with the music that's playing in another room. So instead of having, an automation for each speaker to do that, I have one automation, and depending on which room is then moved into, like it will go, okay, the motion sensor in the living room was activated. So I will then call the script and I will tell the script, okay, the living room motion sensor was done. And therefore you need to change the status of the living room play bar as opposed to the office, Sonos one or whatever. That's actually pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good use for a script there too.
Because I think scripts are really powerful. Like the whole idea being like, if I'm going to do the same code in two automations, I may as well externalize it into a script and take the variables, pass them down into into it that way. And sorry, I'm going to give you one more example just because, I'm a very nice guy, right? I'll give it to you. If you've got tags, like an ESP Home and you want some NFC tags to scan, if you want to create like a jukebox for either TV or music, you could then have that as a script and then have all the variables. So depending on which ESP Home device was used to scan, you could, if this ESP Home device was scanned, I want it to play music on this speaker or this TV show on this TV. That would be another good use case for a script.
Yeah. And or even for playing the actual content, right? That can be the variable there, and then everything else stays static, right? So
because the script you could have like multiple variables. Like you can have, it would just there's so many ways to skin a cat in Home Assistant, and I guarantee you there are, you could do. You don't need to use scripts. You could do it in automations. You could do it in Node.js if you really wanted to. Sorry, not Node.js.
Node-RED.
Node-RED. Thank you. God, too many nodes.
I know.
But yes,
I know.
there you go.
Yeah. No, that's cool. All right. Moving on. Time zone support. So now you can also select what time zone your Home Assistant interface is in your user profile. So if you're traveling or if you have family members in other time zones and so on, you can leverage that. So basically you can say, hey, I'm here, and then my Home Assistant is in that other time zone. And then based on that, it can go and alter time zone. So if you're doing like a cross-country trip, for example, maybe you're crossing some time zones, so on and so forth, you can actually, that might come in handy there as an example. I don't know if that's like a common use, but I think it's pretty handy to have, right? It's
I guess it's necessary. It's necessary for some parts of the system as well. For example, like if you're in the US and you're looking at a instance that's in Europe, the energy dashboard, for example, would be completely out of whack because 6 hours, it's basing on your time zone and it's trying to pull in the other time zone. It just gets out of whack. So
last fired at 12 a.m. Well, it's actually 6 a.m. here, right? So, but that's
and then it would say, last fired 6 hours ago when it was actually 3 seconds ago, right?
Right, because based on your time. So it's handy for when you're traveling and such. But I think what would be cool to kind of tie along with that would be if the Home Assistant companion app, based on GPS data, could place your time zone, right?
Well, it should already do that.
Yeah, but I mean, it can go in and adjust your profile to do that.
Oh, gotcha. I think that might actually have support for that. So in your profile, you can say, all right, should I use my device's time zone or should I use the Home instance's time zone?
But I'm so with this time zone support now, I think like tying all of those pieces together, I think would be pretty neat.
Yeah, gotcha.
Right. Because now it'll because what this brings in is it adjusts the front end times. Right. Yes. So like you said, something happened at 12, but it's currently 6, but it's not, right? Like so based on time zones there, as I'm traveling throughout, that can constantly update. Otherwise, I have to go in and say, hey, go profile Rohan. Time zone is currently Pacific. Current time zone is currently whatever, right? Wherever I am.
Yeah, I think you should be able to set it to say whatever device time zone I've got, use that.
Right, and it's showing you on your device is what it normally does versus and because that's that whole issue you were saying, right? Like 2 seconds ago could be 6 hours ago if there's a time zone issue there.
Yeah,
right?
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
All right, unavailable automations and scripts. So if an automation or a script has an error, it will now show up as unavailable in the interface. So when you then select that automation, it will show you why that error message is there. So you can go on and fix the automation. So if you've got a typo or an indentation issue in your automation somewhere, rather than it, just completely crashing everything, it should, in theory, mark it as unavailable, and away you go.
That's perfect. Super fast Bluetooth proxies. Also, I love the Bluetooth proxy functionality, right? I've been using it for a while, and it's been phenomenal. But they're even faster now, like really, really fast. So when you update your ESP 32s with the latest ESP Home and this release of Home Assistant, basically what happens is it sends the raw data from those Bluetooth devices directly to Home Assistant. So Home Assistant is processing it, not that pre-process. It doesn't get filtered or pre-processed on the ESP itself. Yep. So that way, what that does is effectively you should see somewhere like 40 to 80% drop in network communication between the ESP and Home Assistant itself. So there is, if you use a native Bluetooth stick, like a USB that's plugged into your whatever Raspberry Pi or Nook or whatever you use to run Home Assistant in, and you haven't moved over to Bluetooth proxy, there's a good reason to do so now. Again, like ESP32s are not super expensive for what they are. They're actually, and for the most part, they're probably cheaper than your Blue BLE stick. But you know, they're really handy to have. And the nice thing is, it doesn't have to be around your wherever your Home Assistant install is, right? So I don't have to be like, if that's in my basement or in my attic somewhere where, you know, I'm out of range, I can move this. I can move the ESP32 because at that point I just need wireless, right? And say as long as I have Wi-Fi connectivity, I can effectively move that remote BLE stick. Effectively, is what that is. So, yeah. But it's great to see that. I will be updating my ESP homes like now.
Yeah, apparently it's a huge update. On the creators call, they talked about, you know, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth packets and packaging them all up, and it got a bit. You'd have a field day. You'd be able to tell me around exactly what all that meant. It got a bit over my head, but the TLDR is there. Just update, and if you can, use the proxies, because you'll see a big improvement.
Yeah, I literally just clicked update all on my my ESP home literally now, because I like that.
You know what I would like to see? Look, we have the same IKEA desk. I'd like to see the IKEA desks we have as an integration in Home Assistant. So then I don't have to run that code on an ESP32 to then be a bridge to the IKEA desk, which is just Bluetooth.
Yeah, it's been an ask. It's in, I think I saw it in the ESP32 like feature requests.
Yep.
Like I think it's GitHub somewhere. I think it might just be a level of effort. It might be something else, but yeah, if those of you that know what you're doing, I mean, feel free to contribute. It's the IKEA. I think it's the IDA desk is what it's called. But
that's the one.
But yeah, it'd be cool to see that in there too, and just pick up the table and off you go, right? I think it has to be an active connection because I think you actually need to, like on the desk, you need to pair it.
Yes, yes.
That may be where some of that logic breaks down.
So it's not like a passive read.
It's not passive, okay. But I don't know if that's necessarily a big deal. I think it depends on how the ESP32 advertises itself. Like, is it advertising itself, or is it advertising like a virtual BLE ID of Home Assistant?
Yeah.
Right. So I think depending on how that is, that may or may not work potentially. I don't know. Maybe I don't really. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe.
Okay. Well, I understand what you're saying. Like, maybe
there may be a reason it's not feasible, or maybe it's just honestly just cycles just hasn't been done yet potentially. So.
Yep. All right. The HomeKit controller integration has been renamed to HomeKit device. There was a change in the last release about HomeKit stuff, so it's just to make it more clear that the integration is to integrate the HomeKit devices into Home Assistant. So no change, not a breaking change or anything. It's just a slight little rename there.
Terminology. Apple TV integration now supports launching apps with deep links. So that means if you have like a URI that's like YouTube:// whatever, it can fire off YouTube as an example in the Apple TV.
Yeah, and or to launch a specific video on YouTube, I'm guessing.
Correct, right? And same with like Netflix or Disney Plus or Apple TV Plus or whatever it's called, like whatever they are. But yeah, it is. That's actually pretty handy because now if you're like, hey, go, like if you have an automation to play an episode of your favorite show that's out, say, hey, go play this, and it can actually fire off that URI to your Apple TV, and it can go and play that, whatever that is, right? Hopefully we'll start seeing more apps in there too. I don't know what, I think it looks like it's a subset of apps, but maybe those are just examples. So, they are examples of deep links in popular applications. That's on the release notes. But if you do have, like for example, like a IPTV system or something like that, and that you run through your Apple TV. You say, hey, go fire this up, right, and it'll go do that. And same thing with embedding. Like we talked about the jukebox, right? The NFC jukebox that can go off instead of having several actions to go play this, go find this video, go play that video. Tap it and just fires off a call to turn on your TV and stuff. But then beyond that, directly open this deep link.
Yep.
So, which is
the Roborock integration has added the cleaning area sensors and switches to control do not disturb mode. So, yes, bringing more of those nice little features into that integration.
Yeah. Still like yours, Joe?
Love it. Like obsessed with it.
Right.
The only thing I hate about it is having to constantly refill the water tank, because I don't know if we're using it too much, but like every, once or twice a week, it's like, hey, I'm out of water. I'm like, oh, well, yeah, all right, I guess I'll go fill you up. I still haven't managed to automate it properly, but
good with it. I've been pretty good. I've got to say, filling up my water. The thing I'm not great with is the like if I get the notification being like, hey, like the dust bag or whatever it's called is full, I'm like, I've got a couple more uses out of it. And then I'll run for a little while, and then I'm like, all right, I really have to change this now. But
I hope they don't be like, we don't get to a world where the dust bags have like a chip in them similar to printer cartridges to say, you're using the wrong.
Don't
put it out in the universe.
Yeah, if that is the day I stop buying who's ever's products.
Yeah,
like, but yeah. All right, let's talk about some new integrations. Dremel, their 3D printers are now integrated into Home Assistant, so you can monitor your Dremel 3D printer and check out the how far along it is in the progress wise, and maybe control a couple of things. Hopefully.
Yeah, Ryan, you just got a 3D printer, didn't you?
I did. I did just get a 3D printer, and it has been so much fun.
Which one did you get?
I got the Bambu Lab X1 Carbon, which is, far more of an iPhone style 3D printer compared to a lot of the others.
Yep.
Costs as much as an iPhone, I can tell you that, and then if not more. But it is very simple to use. Again, I think I'm at the point where for that specifically, I don't want to get to the tinkering. I just like I just want it to work.
Yeah.
And so far it has been great. There's a Home Assistant. It's a Hacks add-on.
Mm-hmm. Is it cloud-based or local-based?
It's both. So there is a cloud option, but it is, I believe the Hacks add-on uses it locally.
Nice.
What I learned, I was just Googling around the other day, but they actually have a built-in MQTT server on that thing. So nice. I can go pull stats and do all of those things from MQTT. I don't know how it works for, like, let's say, like turning on the light that's inside there, right? Like, obviously that's a write function. Like, can it read an MQTT topic saying, hey, go turn it on? Or is that an actual API call? I believe that's an API call. The way it's set right now, but you can pull statistics and a lot of those kind of pieces off of MQTT on there. I haven't played with that part yet. I just used the Hacks integration because I'm lazy and it works. Just to monitor the print and stuff like that.
Nice.
I haven't had any automations or anything with it, but just I have it in there. I'll figure out what I want to do after.
Any home automation specific things you're looking forward to printing?
More things for like ESP32 cases and stuff like that. Yep. I do want to, I haven't figured out exactly how I want to do this, but, for outside, I want to put a couple of sensors and stuff like that. So I might build some stuff for there. I'm still in the process of learning, Fusion 360. I've been going through like just tutorials on YouTube and stuff like that. And then when I get confident enough to actually start designing my own stuff, then I might dabble in a couple of those things. But for now, it's just mostly just like I'm trying not to do tchotchkes just because I'm not a I just hate like collecting stuff, if that makes sense. But or I don't hate it. I just find that like I'll be like, oh, this is cool, and it'll stay there, and like a month later, I'm like, all right, and then just chuck it. Right? It's just wasteful, and I don't really want to do that. But it's been like, I don't know, like just stuff that's functional. I just 3D printed earlier. I was showing you, Phil, but for those of you on YouTube, somebody made this and throw it up on like Thingiverse, but it's basically like a little hanger for my ties, right? Like, just stuff like that. I've printed like a desk tray that I designed for my wife for her job, and like those kind of things, right? So I'm trying to make it more functional rather than just like tchotchkes, right? Like, so.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing what you come up with.
Yeah.
Discovergy is a new integration in Home Assistant. So I believe they're in the Netherlands. So you can read out your gas and electricity meters in Home Assistant now. Always handy.
That's cool. Renson, same kind of deal, but ventilation system. So you can go in and monitor your Renson ventilation systems with Home Assistant now.
Locked. Maybe Locked was the one that's in the Netherlands. LOQED. They've got a smart lock that are now integrated into Home Assistant as well.
Oh, that's cool. Another lock, which is cool. Oh, that's a neat little. Sorry, I started googling lock.
Like, didn't you get a lock for your door in the end? Like, you don't need one anymore?
I did. I don't love it. I think it's more just my door that I hate overall. But this is the only ones that actually fits my door for the bore size and stuff. And for those of you that didn't listen to our earlier episodes, basically I have an issue where I can drill out to be a more regular size. However, I have a window pane that's directly there, so I will be drilling through the window, or not through the window, through the frame of the window, which will just be a huge pain, potentially through the window itself. But yeah, so I need a new door, and I don't want to spend like, I don't know, $4,000 or whatever it is for a new door.
Yeah, crazy, right?
Even like 2,000 is very expensive for what I want to spend. All right, let's talk some breaking changes. ESP Home has some additional security hardening that's applied to it. So the ESP Home devices will now have the ability to call any Home Assistant service. But before it can be granted to call that service, and you'll have a repair issue that's raised in Home Assistant telling you to basically asking you for permission to allow the ESP to do whatever task that you're trying to do, right, to call that service. So if you have ESP Home today, existing devices, those should be fine. But
they'll already have permissions.
Yeah, they'll already have permissions. But you do, if you do put in new devices in there and stuff, that just keep an eye out on the repair screen there.
All right. So Home Assistant is attempting to reduce the amount of breaking changes they've got. So Home Assistant is now requiring that any YAML configuration option that is deprecated, it must now be have a deprecation notice for at least 6 months before it is removed from YAML. So what the team were finding is that not everyone is updating the Home Assistant every month, right? And with only 2 release cycles, if I'm waiting 4 months, 5 months to update my Home Assistant, then I may have missed that breaking change. They've also improved it a little bit further as well. Where possible, an automatic migration is required, and an issue in the repairs dashboard is to be raised if the deprecation applies to your configuration. So if you have an integration in your YAML files today that moves over to the UI, there's going to be 2 changes. One, that your YAML will still work for at least 6 months. And 2, that the YAML will be automatically moved to the UI if it is possible. And also a repair notice issued to say, remove this from your YAML configuration. So yeah, that's a pretty good change.
Yeah, I mean, for the first part, I don't know how much extending it out 6 months is really going to change a breaking change. It's still going to be a breaking change, right? It's just a matter of it gives you time to adjust to it. And
I guess it's also trying to get people's attention more, right? Like, because there are people now that wouldn't see the issue being noticed, like raised in their logs at all, because they don't update that frequently.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a new product department in Nabu Casa. So the idea is they want to give users more of a voice in the roadmap for Home Assistant. So there is, I believe it's more like a product management style of a person that's been brought in. Phil, I know you were on the creators call when they talked about this.
Yeah, so there's a product manager, and I think there's also like a more UI UX focused person on the team as well. So the idea being that the product manager, they're actually in the Discord channels, they're talking to users, they're trying to give basically the users of Home Assistant a voice, because right now the roadmap of Home Assistant is developer focused, right? It's, we've always said, if you want it fixed, if there's a bug, you want it fixed, raise a PR, right? And we just assume that everyone using Home Assistant is a developer. We want to move away from that, and have, product managers actually dictate on a roadmap and say, hey, this is what would make the product better from a user's point of view, not from what's, fun and good from a developer's point of view. So yeah, maybe that's my product management talk coming out a bit there. But that's where a product manager should be doing there.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing. I mean, there's not really a downside to it as long as the community is still centric to that, right? Like
exactly.
At the point, I mean, like if that ever changes, then I will change my opinion about that. But I think for now, it's not a bad thing, right? It's looking after things like, hey, I'd love to have this kind of feature. I'd love to have these kind of features, and then potentially prioritizing those features, right? So let's say even if it's right now, it's 100% what the developers build and that's it, and then maybe this is more of a 50-50 or something like that, right?
And if we want to remove that stigma that like you need to be a developer to use Home Assistant, then we need someone that's not a developer or doesn't have a developer, like has a non-developer users, in mind when designing things. So I think it's good.
I agree.
It's good. All right, so PJ emailed feedback@haspodcast.io. In the last release episode, Ryan, I talked about my idea for the Aqara Zigbee door window sensor, how I wanted to know the state of my sliding door, if it was locked or unlocked. So PJ emailed in, he said, hi, I've just listened to that episode and you mentioned using those Zigbee door sensors. Well, here are some tips because I'm actually using that very same solution. So tip number 1, it appears that Aqara door window sensors have 2 additional soldering spots on the PCB, just on either side of the reed switch. So in my limited testing, I was actually able to, without doing any soldering, if I just jumped those 2 spots on the switch, I was able to trigger the switch. So that's what sort of gave me this idea of doing this in the first place. Tip number 2 from PJ was a micro switch was small and easy to implement, but it is not too durable, and after a couple of months, it just broke. So I'm guessing a micro switch must be something really tiny that when the pin of the door lock touches it, it just flicks the switch on or off. So what he did find was he found a better solution, and that was springs. So if you have enough space in the frame, of course. So I used springs from the battery slot from an old toy, and springs had a piece of metal attached to it, so it was ready to be glued inside the door frame. So I'm guessing, to my, the negative side of the battery, those springs that are at the negative side of the battery that you would push against from the battery compartment, he's just used 2 of those. So as the pin from the lock touches those and completes the circuit, would then trigger that Aqara door sensor to mark as locked in Home Assistant. So, and then he goes on, PJ goes on, I've got the lock configured as, I've got the door sensor configured as a lock domain, and now I can ask my Google Assistant about the lock's status, and it will tell me which one is locked or unlocked. I can also start some automations triggered by locking or unlocking a door. I can't automatically lock them, obviously, but that wasn't the intention. PJ, thank you so much for that. PJ's also been kind enough to share some photos as well. We'll leave them up on the show notes on haspodcast.io. Check it out there.
Interesting. So I know there's folks that like have typically like either desoldered the reed switch or just cut off the reed part of it and then soldered onto there, stuff like that. Is it those pads that you solder onto, is that the same pad? So it's effectively like door open or door close is what it's saying? Or is there a way to say to have those pins that you solder this onto? Is it possible to have that as an independent domain so you can still use it as a door window sensor, but then also use it as a lock sensor?
So the problem there, so the issue you've got is that the sensor only exposes one state, which is on or off.
Yeah.
Now, what I was able to do without breaking the device, I actually kept the little reed in place. Yeah. It's a little magnet, right? And so when the magnet gets close to it, it completes the circuit, right? It essentially joins the two sides of the reed switch together, which completes the circuit, which changes the state, so on or off. I was able to just put a jump wire on either side of the reed switch and complete the circuit that way. And I didn't take the reed out, so therefore you could, in theory, just put a magnet up to it and it would still do the same thing.
Okay. So it's still the same. So it is the same circuit as the reed switch itself. So closing this would close effectively the reed switch.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
And then in Home Assistant, because you can use the device classes, you can then say this isn't a door or this isn't a window. It's actually a lock, and the state is locked or unlocked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So I'm actually glad someone else had the idea. So glad I'm not the only one out there.
Yeah. No, that's neat. Awesome. I think that's our episode.
Yeah.
And 2022.7. All right. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. All right.
Cheers.
Take care.